How's it going? Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody watching episode 21. I believe this is episode 21 of Freestyle Friday for the Life is a Freestyle metaphor. My name is GregNWMN, and we have probably one of our most special guests as of late as we continue on throughout October. And perhaps you want to introduce herself because the list of credentials is long. And that's why I feel as though it would be amazing if she were to just give us a brief intro as to, who you are and why is it that this list is incredibly long.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Dwaynica and I am an aspiring neuroaesthetician. So I study in the field of neuroaesthetics, which is basically looking at art, creativity, and just the responses that it elicits in the brain. And I basically do that. So through my research, I specifically focus on performing arts because that's just my main practice from, prior to studying in university. But not only do I research the arts, I also practice in the arts. So I practice across performing and creative arts. That's dance, I've done theatre, poetry, and the list goes on. And also I work in the arts as well. So I think my life is basically, it encompasses these three main things: to research the arts, to practice in the arts, and to teach the arts.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, again, on behalf of the whole, Life is a Freestyle family, we appreciate you taking the time. We're reporting live directly from UK.
Yeah.
I'm in Birmingham, I know how it is getting this time crunch thing taken care of. So I appreciate your time, and I love the fact that the arts are such a heavy component within your life. I think it's a heavy component within a lot of people's lives. And what we try to do at Life is a Freestyle is we try to highlight the aspects where freestyle, which most would consider only surrounds itself around the framework of maybe hip hop or rap, and how that really informs so many different aspects of our life, and how we kind of all are freestyling in different aspects, whether it's in a micro way or in a macro way. So I kind of want to open it up and pick your brain as to what does Life is a Freestyle mean to you, that metaphor? I would love to get your take on it.
So for me personally, being interdisciplinary, so I'm in STEM and I'm also in the arts as well. So in terms of my research, I am freestyling. I am literally across two fields, picking certain aspects from these fields and implementing that into my research. But not only my research, me as a person, I feel like I am interdisciplinary in just what I do. As I said, I'm across performing and creative arts. So for me, I like to look at life's questions. I like to be inspired by the world. And the way that I freestyle is I take everything, like anything. So say for instance, I'm inspired by just some sort of stimulus in the world. The first thing I think is, okay, am I going to write a poem about this? If I can't do that, can I write a song about this? If I can't do that, will I choreograph a dance? And if I can't do that, will I turn it into a hypothesis and create a research a project out of it? And for me, it's just having all those skills in the bag, just like, as we Brits say, being a jack of all trades and basically taking it out of the bag and just seeing what works and being very experimental with what I do and how I live my life in general.
Very powerful. And on top of that, it's making, I think making note of not necessarily giving up on the attempt and the methodology to take a topic and mold that topic and warp it if it doesn't fit a certain criteria, right? So if it's not optimal for perhaps the choreographing space, maybe it's optimal for a song. Maybe it's optimal for, more so a science-based research topic. Maybe there is something deeper at a different level and at a different geographical place. So I love the fact that you touched on that, because I think most people would just give up, right? When they realize that one works, they're just like, okay, I'm done forever. So it's great to know that at least this interpolation is kind of what we call it, is taking place in actively. And I think there's really no better person to kind of touch on this topic. But I wanted to kind of inquire, part of what we do at Life is a Freestyle is, try to answer the question, what is freestyle? Not only are we doing this thing, but at the same time, what is it that we're doing? Are these micro decisions? Are these macro decisions? What exactly is freestyle? Of course, in different contexts, it means different things. And so, so can you tell me, what is art to you in general? and what does, you know, the role of freestyle have to do within the context of art from your perspective?
Okay, so when I was thinking about what is art, it's one question that I guess as researchers, I mean, maybe I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, it's like, we don't know. I think the question is, when does something become art? Because obviously that's more easier to deconstruct and to find properties and to conduct empirical research on it. And because what I've learned just through what I've studied is that, okay, what's the difference between hearing a sound and when does that sound actually become music? Like, what's the difference between somebody walking, when does that walking become dance? And I think if you want to look at it in that technical way, it's like, where is the line? And I guess that's what, as researchers in neuroaesthetics, that's just what we continue to do. For those that actually research that specific side of it, is like, when does something actually become art? But then also, I think of it in terms of the linguistics of the word. The fact that we've taken the word art. It's a word say in English language, and obviously other languages have other ways in how they say art. But if we just look at English for now, and the word comes from a Latin word, as most words do in English. And what I think about is we've taken this word and we've used it to categorize something. And what is this something? And this something is probably, okay, something we find beautiful, something we find moving. I don't know the specific definition in Latin, but if you just like translate that to in English, how we sort of use the word art. And I was really thinking about how, so anything in this category or anything that looks like this thing, okay, we put that label of art on it. But then it's interesting because then we can see cross cultures that you can look at a culture and this thing they do translate to the word art in, say, in English, but in that culture, that might be something way more sacred or might be something just a part of their daily life in their culture. And you can also see that, I don't want to say conflict, but just going deep. I'm a deep person, so I go deep into everything.
No,
so it's just
great thing. And I feel as though the depth, you know, the depth of, to your point, the categorization of how people culturally use, perhaps in some contexts, misuse or misrepresent, as being highlighted as of late in terms of the current culture. But we find that it does have an effect on daily lives. And it's in a way, in some contexts, baked in, where we don't know we're doing cultural things, you know, but we just radiate this level of cultural essence and it just becomes picked up and permeates throughout life. And then some more people, you know, might fight against traditionalism. You know, it might fight against progressivism. You know, it might fight against the sciences or what have you. So that's where I feel like a perfect bridge would be to kind of touch on what your perspective is in terms of what's the biological purpose of art.
okay. So in terms of biological theories, I think the main ones that I can recall that we look at when studying neuroaesthetics is look at the sexual selection, which is basically based on a lot of studies to do with animals, to do with birds, etc. And just looking at how animals have used art, or what we define as art, because you don't know, to an animal this could just be a normal thing in life, but then we look at it, say this translates with what we think art is, and we think, okay, this animal is producing art for the purpose of finding a mate. So that one finding that has basically been found in, and we're looking at the biological theories behind aesthetics and art in neuroaesthetics. But one theory that I find so interesting, I mean, I don't wholly agree with it, but I just find it really, really interesting, is the fact that art is a spandrel. So this is the spandrel hypothesis, and it's basically meaning that art was just a byproduct. So as humans were made to do, you know, specific natural things, like say natural selection, all these things, and art doesn't, well, I guess in the terms of sexual selection, it might help natural selection, but we found that there is conflict with that, say with certain animals, that they would choose certain things that are aesthetically pleasing in a partner, but that doesn't actually help natural selection. So the fact that, okay, so going back to the spandrel, is just that art is a byproduct. It's just like a leftover effect of, you know, a human is made, we're made to do these specific things, and art is just something on the side. Like, I don't agree with it, but I find it, I don't know, I find it so fascinating when I first heard about it, because for me, as somebody who, like, art is a part of my whole life, to think that, oh wow, like, is it a byproduct? And yeah, that's, yeah.
And that's great, because I think when we take a look at, to build off of what you were mentioning, is that it's all contextual and perspective based, whereas a biological animal can create this level of art, you know, in a sense for its own survival, but at the same time, in a sense to, you know, thrive, right, and build some sort of, you know, lineage and things of that nature. But at the same time, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, it seems, right? Whereas we create these things and it almost on every level, there is no tacit value to this thing, where I can do something and I could label it as a creative endeavor. Anyone could do something and label it as a creative endeavor, and it may or may not have value, right? And I think in a way, with that being said, it's hard to see and really gauge. There's no SI unit for, you know, whether or not something is impactful or not, and whom is it impacting. There's just so many kind of variables, you know, in the mix. So I think that's a very interesting theory, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that as we go on, for sure. So when it comes to, at least at SOSA, Society of Spoken Art, which is the framework of really the back framework of the project that we're creating, which is Life is a Freestyle. The Society of Spoken Art specializes in influencing and really mentorship when it comes to having people whom are familiar with writing, familiar with storytelling, familiar with really rapping, you know, hip hop related things, and turning those people who might not know what they're doing, really arming them with the linguistic and poetic knowledge of saying, this is what you're doing. And so we're really working through Life as a Freestyle to be able to tap into and debate and really get to the root of why we do the things we do, and why do we continue to progress in the things we do, although that SI unit does not necessarily show itself at all corners, right? And sometimes there's this mystification throughout the process. So at times at SOSA, we like to debate how to measure certain qualities of rap through music and lyricism. And recently we asked some of our cognitive scientist guests on how they measure things like creativity. How do you measure art now that we know there's no SI unit? And artistic quality personally, like when you hear something, this is definitely a one-to-one perspective from you. How do you measure the psychological response to aesthetics?
Well, okay. So I guess there's like two parts in that. So the first part is just because I like to look outside of research as well, because I'm big on that as well. I like to look at the statistics, and I like to look at, just as you asked me, how do I feel? And I really feel like it's an indescribable thing, but you know it. And it sounds so cliche, but when something hits you, like if you listen to a song or you look at a painting, like I remember one time I basically went on like a tour of the city, like being a tourist in London when I'm already in London. And I basically took my cousins on this like grand tour of London. I went to a art gallery, and this was before I was even into visual arts. And we just went because galleries are free and you should go and, you know, have the experience.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, there was one painting, and I remember we were just stood there and we were just mesmerized. And we've never ever had that before. And it sounds so weird, but this is literally my experience. At that moment, I was like, I get it. Because say like with music, of course, I always listen to music. With dance, that's a part of my life. But as I said, at that point, I was new to visual arts, and just looking at that painting, I was like, oh. And we sat there for like probably half an hour, just sitting, chilling in front of this painting. And that experience was, when I actually think about it, it was amazing. But then say taking something like that and then now applying it to research in terms of measuring aesthetic responses, judgments, and engagement when it comes to art, it's about deconstructing that artwork into its properties. So say for instance, this art piece that I saw, okay, we have to be very specific now because when creating hypotheses, you can go, I said, the field is broad and there's so many directions you can go, but it's like, is it the colors? Is it the shading? Is it the style of art? Is it the distance of the artwork, the size of the artwork? And you literally start there. It's like you choose your field, and then you choose maybe a genre, and then you choose a specific piece, and then you deconstruct that piece and find an element of it, and then say, okay, now look at the human now. Does it make us happy? Does it make us sad? Do we stare at it for longer? Does it make us remember our memories? Does it increase our social engagement, like the after effects, not just the direct effects of looking at art, but does it then change our behavior as we go through life? And I think it starts like, well, for me, I can speak for myself. Everything I say, I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah.
But that's I see it.
Yeah, very. See, and that's again, it's very interesting because depth. I didn't even think of when we're looking at a painting or you're looking at any visual piece that when you step away from it further, the perspective of, well, your literal visual perception. I mean, there's constraints. There's how well can you see this thing? How busy is it? How simple is it? Quickly be downloaded and processed, and you could say, okay, this is my gauge of this piece. And I think we have a lot of those kind of predispositions and a lot of those really quick assessments of a lot of the visual components of what we come across throughout our life in multiple different ways. So I would love to get your perspective here on this next piece. I think that's a perfect bridge into this. So what in general, let me see here. What in general are some of the challenges of merging studies in science and art? Because now I'm thinking of, there were visual constraints that we were just talking about, and really personal perspective constraints as well as to what do I generally personally find interesting. Yes. So not make the question too long-winded. So what are some of the merging studies in science and art that you find challenging? And also, do you find your artwork influences your scientific work and vice versa? It's almost like two different sides of the coin, some might say, but I think it could very much be one and the same. So I'd love to hear your take.
Okay, so in terms of the constraints, speaking for myself, funding is literally right now, honestly, for me, funding is one of the major things that's just holding me back at this particular moment in time. And I really had to deep that and think beyond the fact of just being able to go into your institution and conducting research, but the fact that, say for me, studying performing arts, so whether that's dance or whether that's acting, I need a theatre space, a rehearsal space. I'm looking at ecological validity. Yeah, put that out there. But yeah, basically looking at that. So I really need to be in the space. That's just what I'm interested in. So when you get a theatre space, you need the actors, the director, and you need lighting, sound, using the space legally. You need a performance manager, you need the front of house team, and then now coming away from that, now as a scientist, I need my equipment. I need to fund that. And so I think there's so many elements to it. And for me, in my experience, that's why you need a bigger team now. So it's not just you as a researcher, but perhaps having like a normal performance. Like if you're putting on a production, there's so many people involved in that. And that is why, if you want to just why is funding important apart from just obviously getting into your institution, doing your work, is because there's actually so many other people that you need to cut the check for. Do you know what I mean? And looking away from that now, okay, say you've got it now, you're able to do it. The question is literally, what am I interested in? Literally like what you said, and what element of it. And for me, I mean, I kind of find it fun to sort of create hypotheses and just link everything together because my brain can do that. But through conversations, I've realized that it's not actually easy for everyone to do that because it might be really new for people. This field is very new compared to other fields. So for people, it's literally like sitting down and actually brainstorming it and thinking, how can I actually merge my fields together? How can I be interdisciplinary in the way that I conduct my research? And then to go on to the second question, in terms of does my art impact my science and my science impact my art, I say that being in performing arts got me interested in science because I don't know for other countries, but say in the UK, art in the curriculum compared to STEM doesn't have the same respect, I would say. And that was my experience coming from being a teenager in school and the conflicts that was faced between, say, the science department and the theatre department, because you need to get your science grades, you need to get your English, you need to get your maths, and that's how you go further in life. Yes, I did that because I was just that person that was, decent around the base. As I said, my life is, it's a freestyle. I've got loads of things in the bag. But it was actually my foundation in theatre that got me interested into science. And obviously people in general, because my background is psychology. So yeah, people in general. But I like to say that simply because whenever I get the chance, I like to encourage anyone listening that thinks that, you can't go and do something else because there's a limitation or a stigma on a certain field. No, everything inspires everything. And I said my science, my art inspires my science. But then the funny thing is science, of course, can inspire art, but there is that big question of whether, okay, does being a researcher in art affect the way that you make your art? I can actually disassociate myself from the two. I think, you know, studies might prove different, but I am able to choreograph a dance, and of course my science helps in a way that I think about aesthetics. But then when making an art piece, there are so many other variables that you're thinking about that it's not as if your science confounds your art, vice versa. So I said a lot.
No, great, amazing. That's an amazing platform to work from, because you're speaking about, I mean, really, there's like looseness in topicality and in quality control and an approach, and then there's tightness in quality control and approach as well. And when we find generally, more often than not, the conflicting elements of science and art, we put ourselves in a position where we're wondering as to, well, am I loose in my art because I'm so rigid in these other spaces? Or do these spaces implicitly kind of call for these things in order for us to be able to get to the results that we're actually looking for? And I also find it kind of interesting how when we think of the looseness of art, perhaps the tightness and the structure needed in the science perspective translates over and maybe creates some of those smaller adjustments within art where it's, you know, I know that there's a certain methodology, or there's a script that I'm following, or there's these variables that are at play that are kind of non-negotiable. Here's the limiting variables in this circumstance, scientifically speaking, right? Here's our test pool. Here are the certain properties that I need to acknowledge, because this is what's going to take me to the proper, at least theory or solution. And maybe in the arts, as I'm drawing, as I'm writing a record, as I'm performing a record, as I'm dancing, as I'm doing these things, it's like I could step with this left foot here, but perhaps if I were to angle it here and shift my balance here, and those small intricacies, I feel like are pretty parallel at some points in time with the hairline changes that you're making to get to your result that you want to get to in scientific studies. So I think that's great. And I think there's that juxtaposition that always exists, that I think if we were to consider, perhaps it's pairing freestyle and that looseness with structure and creating some level of structured, perhaps there's a middle ground where most people don't traverse that probably should be traversed, because then they could be as multifaceted, right? I think that's great. So you carried out a study, you know, in which you examined the emotions of theater crowds and performers, and how they influenced one another. You know, can you tell us a little bit more about this study, and what inspired you to do it?
Yes, so this was the most recent study that I've done for my master's project, and I basically looked at whether audience participation, so if the audience member can basically go on the stage, whether that has an effect on their engagement. And then I looked at this in theatre, basically. And what inspired this was, it was actually a really big project. it was my uni and another uni that it was literally a production, honestly. And it was a mixture. For me, it was amazing, because that was the first time that I've obviously ever done something like that. And I'm a scientist, I'm an artist, and everything that I was speaking about before at the same time. And yeah, what inspired it in terms of my section, because it was a really, really big study, and I had that one section of it, was really, there's different types of theatre. We've got like traditional theatre, which is what everybody knows. The audience sits here, the actors are there, you watch, you do not interject at all. Of course, you can laugh. And sometimes, if you think about it, you know, someone laughs too hard next to you, you might even look at them funny. And it's, you know, it's with, it's like, it's that interaction is quite standard. But then you've got other styles of theatre, such as form theatre and immersive theatre, where the audience is a participant is an actor, basically.
Right.
Wait, repeat the last.
There's a fourth wall being broken, right?
Yes, of course. You're literally on the stage, so it's not even being able to speak from your seat. You are now on the, and not even on the stage. There's for immersive theatre, there's no stage. The whole thing, the stage and where the audience is the same place. That line doesn't even exist. So obviously thinking about that through just what I studied before in theatre, I basically took a element of it. And because as I said, the study was big, so there were certain elements that I couldn't control. So the performance was a performance that had a mixture of science in it, had the participatory element that I basically did in it, and basically had just the normal like acting in it. And I basically just went to see, okay, in that participatory period, if you're on the stage, do you basically engage more with the performance than when you're not on the stage? So that's literally, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you feel as though, did you feel as though that when it came to the way you found that people reacted to certain things, I'm curious to see, because in a study, you're kind of presenting it, right? You mentioned it was for your master's, but did that change your perspective at all when it came to now when I reapproach my art, knowing that people react to these certain things this way? Did that re-influence your process in any way, as like a side auxiliary question? Just curious.
Well, my findings were actually highly non-significant. So I basically found that they actually wasn't a fit, but there's so many reasons as to why this could be. And if I had to replicate it, I know exactly why it fits. Because for starters, it was a participatory period and the whole thing was not form fitter or immersive theatre. But the one finding that I did find out was significant was the fact that the audience participants felt more engaged, and this was through self-report measures, because I conducted 2 different types of measurements on the audience, and they basically found the scientists' performance more engaging, and they felt more connected to it compared to the audience spectators, which were the ones that were not on the stage. And I found that interesting because the whole performance was for the purpose of science, and the audience were aware of that. They were aware that this is an experiment is going on, data will be explained, etc. And the fact that the audience was more engaged with the scientists and not even the actors, it just made me think about purpose as well. And as you asked, like, how would I, like, has this ever influenced how I create my art? Not directly, like I've never thought of it like that, but if I was to think about it, it's just the sense that why are the audience there, like their understanding of why they're there and the purpose of the performance, perhaps that affects their engagement with it. Because say for me, when I'm choreographing a dance, and I mainly do this in my religious institution, and it's the fact that that dance is you already know that the purpose of this dance is to basically minister. The purpose of this dance is it has like a theological background, and it's meant to hit more than just your emotions, but perhaps like hit your soul as well. And when you come with that expectation, like the audience members coming knowing that, okay, this is a scientific experiment, even if it's a performance, perhaps that helps the engagement and the connectivity in that way, because of that expectation.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like that's something that also, could be taken into consideration, where, you find that a lot of times when we go down the rabbit hole of really reaching to see if we can extract value from certain things, especially things as intensive as the study sounds, it seems as though, you go down a direction and what you really pull out of it is maybe not even the result, but in fact, the actual value of the journey and the replication. And okay, if I were to reiterate it, this is how I would do it again, this is how I would do it again. And it's really this volumetric, this volumetric, repetitive based methodology that really gets our strength to freestyle and our strength to create, and levels that up in a certain way. So, that's amazing to hear. So I was interested in touching on, among your artistic talents are, dance and photography, as we mentioned. While it's easy to see how freestyling could be a component of dance, it's not necessarily so for photography. How does freestyle contribute to your process in photography? Now, I can come up with some ideas for this, but I would love
I love this question. Literally, I love, because this question is actually so interesting. And for me, when I had to think about it, I thought that in terms of freestyling with photography, so for me, I basically take pictures of the sky and of plants, mainly flowers, etc. And I feel like I'm not even the one that's freestyling. Like, of course, you have to get the right angles. And disclaimer, I'm not a professional photographer, etc. So this is just me speaking about just as I do as my hobby, etc. But it's the fact that I feel like nature is freestyling, and I'm capturing an element of nature's freestyle. And within that, say when for instance, some of my posts, I will write poetry that goes with them. And I guess in that element, I freestyle in the sense of how can I take this snapshot of nature and how does that relate to just something else that's happened in my life? How can I see the link? And for me, I was just doing it. And I was doing it for myself, to be honest. my photography of the sky and of plants is because I love the sky. I love it. And I thought, let me just take pictures of it. But one of my friends literally said to me, she was like, Dwaynica, I can see like this thing that you're capturing here. I can see it. And I was like, oh. And another point is that it's so interesting in terms of the nature of freestyling. The reason why I said that is because if I go outside and say, for example, it's sunset and the sky's a specific hue, and I don't take that picture at that specific moment. If I say, okay, 1 minute later, I'm gonna go and do it, the sky will change. Like there are some pictures on my Instagram where it might look like it's a different day. It's the same day. It's like 1 minute apart, and nature is literally doing its thing. And the same with plants as well. If, for example, I have a rose and it blooms, and even if it doesn't bloom, just in whatever state it's in, if I get that inkling, because I do, like I generally get that inkling, okay, this is the picture I need to take. If I ignore it and I come back the next day, that flower's in a completely different state. The weather is in a completely different, the atmosphere is different. The meaning of the picture changes. Yes, it's just a snapshot, but the freestyle happened. It is happening.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Goodness. And I think again, it's almost as if you're participating in what, because I mean, even if you're a participant in this thing, it's like kind of like you're in a cipher or something like that. It's kind of like you're in this mix of, I'm not necessarily the person, it's not really my turn to do the thing. I'm just a participant in this process, and I'm watching this magic take place. So in a way, I'm the structured component of this. I'm the tightness of this process. I'm capturing the looseness of this process in order to bridge that. So it's kind of interesting how there's this constant hand in hand, push and pull to this process. Because I think once we take a look at those aspects, I mean, there's just really just so much value there. And I'm definitely going to be taking that with me as I continue to take photos of the sky, which I do as well,
Oh my gosh!
But you never know. So it's, so that's amazing. So to switch gears a little bit, to more of like social media, social, I guess, conversations that are taking place currently. There's a lot going on. But, recently Twitter has been the launching platform for many campaigns promoting Black people in different scientific disciplines, i.e. Black in AI, Black in Neuro, Black in Geosciences, which we need way more of. And Black people are highly underrepresented in STEM programs. So what has been the importance of these campaigns, and what does it mean to be a Black woman in the field that is dominated by not that?
Yes. So for me, Black in Neuro means, because obviously I was a part of Black in Neuro, I've been a part of Black in Arts and Humanities as well. But since Black in Neuro was like the first that I was basically involved in, I'll basically base what I'm saying on that. And for me, it came at such a perfect time because I like to say I'm in limbo. I'm basically, as I said earlier, like I'm in a position where I need funding so I have a place to continue my studies, but I need funding. But because I do a lot of things, as I said earlier, I work, etc., etc. So I was focusing on that, which is absolutely fine. And I just thought, okay, I'm just going to wait and see what happens, etc. And perhaps life knew that I may have become too complacent in terms of trying to just do more in my field without being attached to an actual institution in a way. And through Black in Neuro, it was so inspiring, to see Black people, across the world. Mainly, obviously, I saw a lot of people from the US, Canada, and from the UK as well. And just when you see that, it's like, okay, Dwaynica, you need to pattern yourself. You need to fix up. You need to, not to follow fashion, of course not, but as in, just because you're not attached to an institution, obviously a lot of people are. I said I'm in limbo, but just seeing people just do their thing, seeing our people just do our thing, is so important. And for me, I even had to reflect on the fact that, okay, say when I started studying science properly in secondary school, I actually had diverse teachers. And when I had to think back to that, because obviously you hear a lot of stories where that's not the case for everyone. And obviously my experience is literally just me, myself. Right. And as I moved on in education, obviously that became less and less and less. And perhaps I was being desensitized to it. But then for Black in Neuro, I realized, you know what? No. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't what you experienced when you were younger. That should have been the norm. Like, there's a lot of work to be done in these fields. And for me, I say it to the team, everyone, all the time, I'm so grateful. And specifically, you spoke about me as a woman. And I'm even going to be more specific as a Caribbean woman, because I'm British, but I'm British Caribbean. And that was the first time ever I've seen so many Caribbean women, Black women in research, in STEM, should I say, because it was neuroscience. First time. And you know when you don't know you need something until you have it, and then you're like, oh my gosh, like I needed that. I didn't know I needed that, but I did. And through Black in Neuro, now based in the UK, I'm now a member of the African Caribbean Research Collective, which is for PhD placeholders, candidates, and postdocs of Caribbean descent in the UK. And I said, through Black in Neuro, I've been able to find even more specific of my people. And as a Caribbean woman, because I hold that really, really like high for my, you know, in terms of my identity, I have been in a place now where I now understand more about the PhD experience from learning from my people. And if I didn't have that, honestly, I would have been walking in to doing a PhD so blind to, of course, knowing the realities that happen. But of course, when somebody that's your friend or acquaintance and is telling the story in front of you and you're like, oh my gosh, like I would have never had that experience. And I would have been so confused. And I would have probably been in a whole bunch of situations and not knowing how to act, not have that support, that community. So I think it's so important to have a community, to find your people. And you may not know it. Like, as I said, with me, I think it, but I didn't. Do you know what I mean? But when you actually get in that position, you're like, yes.
Yeah.
Basically.
That's incredibly well said, because I do think that when you see somebody whom looks like you, similar to you, when you see somebody whom or even just diverse peoples, right? And of every shade and every background kind of do what you thought, dang, I don't see a lot of representations of this. And this keeps that area and that criteria fresh. I think capturing that is one of the most powerful things we can do. Being incorporated and injecting ourselves within that is one of the most powerful things as well, because what we're really doing is we're breaking the chain, really, in multiple different facets of, you know, hey, perhaps society expects me or expects people who might look like me or people who might share the same cultural background as me to act a certain way. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's any ceiling at all. It's really kind of this imaginary thing where, you know, just because someone from perhaps my lineage or my ethical identity or ethnic identity hasn't done X does not mean I'm not going to be at X and take it to Y, right? Yeah. And so 100% identify with that. You know what I mean? So my family from Kingston, Jamaica, you know, wagwa, you know what I mean? But it's just, listen, we can, you know, we can you know, so it is what it is, you know what I mean? But for the most part, I love that. I love that. And so, yeah, with everything going on especially with like COVID now, I mean, you mentioned the limitations in regards to funding. Everyone has to really pivot in these certain ways to make sure that they still are able to maintain, sustain, and also elevate as well. You know, so through COVID, do you find that you're in a place where you are now finding alternative ways to be able to finding these creative ways to, again, whether it be tighten up or patent oneself, or to be able to at least create the network to be able to find some level of filling the cracks in the foundation, right? Because I mean, I think we all have these ideas of, you know, wanting to build these things, but sometimes the most difficult structure is finding the right foundation to level it and then trying to build on top. A lot of people kind of just try to build as you're kind of leveling, and it's, you know, there's things that come of that, you know, unfortunately, negative repercussions. How do you feel as though the pandemic, how do you feel as though people's mannerisms around this period of time, whether it be in a scientific space or in an artistic space for you, has kind of informed your movements? How have your movements changed from this year to last year?
So the one thing that I've been deeping, and not just in academia, just as a whole, is just how people have basically connected their worth in terms of their skills to a building. That's something that I really deep, and it's what I was saying before about the whole, okay, I'm not in a building, or I'm not I've got a place in an institution but can't function in it. But you need to understand that, say if you're an artist, you being an artist is not connected to a building. You being a scientist is not connected to a building. The question is, like, you as a person, what can you do to be what it is that you are outside of these materialistic constructions. So I would say to people, like, just know, if you are a dancer, even if you're not on the stage, you are a dancer. If you are a scientist, yeah, if you are a scientist and you're not in the lab, you're still a scientist. And the question is, and it was actually one of my siblings that was saying to me, okay, so what are you gonna do? What, you know, you can still do things even if you're not in, you know, a building. And that's just what I've been deep in. And that's why I said that Black in Neuro came at the right time when I was really thinking about that. And I was thinking, how can I still, I said my three aims to teach the arts, to practice the arts, and to research the arts. How can I do that just going through life, not being attached to these and somewhat problematic as well institutions, etc.? Like, how do I do that as a person? Because you as the person, you are the skill. Say like teachers not being able to be in a room, you know, you're still a teacher. You have the skill. Your skill doesn't vanish when you're outside of a building. So that's what I've been really deeping in COVID.
Okay, interesting. And you touched on some of the kind of the constraints that come along with perhaps being somebody of a different or a different descent or an unusual descent in a certain field. How has those interactions informed the way that you network? Do you find that you network differently when in certain spaces because you feel as though contextually the environment's made for certain things to succeed? Or do you kind of keep an unapologetic approach to the way that you convey yourself to your peers, things of that nature? Because I mean, it's sometimes it's tough being in the sciences, and you know, and also having, you know, ethnic cultural cues within the context of who you are in general, right?
Yes, this is so funny because I was literally having this conversation a couple hours ago. Honestly, I was crazy. So
Yeah.
I was thinking, say me as a Caribbean woman, and me being from London and a specific part in London as well, and that comes with so many stigmas that you don't even know until you step out and meet others that are not from the same place as you, etc. And even in your own home, you can even have, because of the things that was taught to our generations and because of the experiences they had to go through, the things that they teach us that are obviously counter our culture, etc., and trying to attain to a more Eurocentric way of life, etc. You might even have to deal with that in your own home as well. But I don't know why. But me as a person, I've always been like, there is no such thing as a filtered version of myself. Now, of course, you might subconsciously change in certain areas, and you might not even be aware of it until you come home and maybe reflect, etc. But I think just the way that I've moved through life from since I was younger, I was like, I know I'm a Black Caribbean woman. I know I'm from a specific part of London. I know that, and I'm not ashamed of that at all. But as I was saying to some of the people that I was speaking to earlier, perhaps it was easy for me because maybe I just didn't have a lot of conflict compared to other people. Because as I said, my experience is just me. Other people may have had so much conflict that they couldn't even do that. Perhaps my environment was healthy enough to create that kind of vibe to my personality. But one thing I've realized is that, yes, even if you might lose opportunities, and it's easy to say, so I said, I'm really just speaking for myself, but I don't want to be anywhere where I can't be me. Basically, I don't want to do that. So to directly answer in terms of networking, I don't know. To be fair, I never networked a lot before. I said Black in Neuro, the Twitter networking has been, I guess, easier in a way as well, because you don't have to actually go up to people and speak to them, etc. But as I was saying earlier, like, I literally found, so the African Caribbean Research Collective, actually they found me. I didn't find them, they found me. And so I've been networking in that way as well, and really seeing how, as I said earlier, finding your people, so specifically finding, say, Caribbean researchers in the UK, etc., how that basically affirms just what I've been doing before, how I've been presenting myself before, and how I can also, through what I've been through and just my personality, because I've realized that if you bring a certain vibe to the table, other people realize, you know what, it's actually all right. And they can be their authentic selves as well. So it's to also create that environment for other people just through life.
Mm-hmm. See, and that's great, because a lot of times we have, I mean, again, I think when we're in a lot of these spaces, especially when we have the luxury to be in a first world country where, you know, that we don't necessarily have to worry about, I mean, there is some level of medical infrastructure. There is some level of technological infrastructure. There is some level of economical infrastructure, and we don't necessarily have to fight every day. Perhaps like people, you know, that 1 or 2 generations back, or very recent, you know, where it was not like that. And I think it's beautiful to see that we can look at these representations and say, you know, I'm going to use, you know, all of the wind that was built up from those experiences and use that to be unapologetically myself, because what's more progressive than melding all the experiences that I've had in all these spaces and then using that to say, you know, this is a walking representation of what a progressive mentality might be. You know, dynamism, interpolation, freestyling, these things are the future, you know, and those whom are really able to kind of capture that lightning in a bottle in a way are the ones who are going to see a very quick return on investment, energy wise, financially, emotionally, when it comes to, okay, well, I put myself forward and I find that charismatically people are just taking to who I am, and it means less and less and less what I look like, because on a test, when we're battle tested, if you deliver, it is what it is, right? And that's kind of one of the it's what it is, and it's one of the beautiful parts of kind of the sciences is and some of more of the rigid, more tacit aspects are, you know, is the answer correct? And if the answer is correct, it doesn't matter where you came from or how you feel or whatever. It's more of, I did the job, right? And so I think that's the beautiful part about it, is that growing up with some level of understanding that people are different, some level of people have more than me and people have less than me, and that's okay, you know. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm any less or more capable, or anyone else is less or more capable than anyone else. That informs my decisions, informs the things that I'm going to be capable of. If I don't know my own limitations, who can tell me about my own limitations if I don't know, right? So there's that. To go back into the neuroscientific lane just briefly, because you know way more than I do. You know, I just rap. So, with that being said, part of neuroaesthetics is, you know, to study the perception of pleasurable experiences. You know, what's the difference in pleasure derived from art, you know, i.e. listening to music, compared to more primitive forms of pleasure like food or sex?
Yeah. So firstly, I'd like to recommend a book, actually, The Aesthetic Brain by Anjan Chatterjee, one of the pioneers in neuroaesthetics. And that book has a section on pleasure and a chapter on those primitive nature that you're talking about. And so I guess what I'll say is sort of come.
What was the name of the book one more time?
The Aesthetic Brain.
The Aesthetic Brain. Fantastic. I'm gonna make a note of this.
A really, really good read. Really like fluently written as well. So, you know, I think people will be able to capture it as well if you're just starting out into finding out more about neuroaesthetics. So yeah, what I'll say will come from there, but also just from my own thoughts, because I'm just experimenting with, you know, my opinions. So firstly, it's the whole thing between liking and wanting, and the fact that when you, I guess, you know, they say that when you look at an artwork, for instance, you know that this artwork is, you know, I look at it, but it doesn't mean I'm going to take it and put it in my house. But I'm going to delve into that a little bit more, because it might sound so surface what I'm saying right now. And I guess when it comes to pleasure such as sex or food, etc., I like it, so I'm going to eat it. So I see somebody that's attractive, and perhaps they could be a sexual partner. It's as if there is a second half as to why this thing is pleasurable. There's something you're supposed to do with that pleasurable person, item, etc. after. But when I was thinking about my own just thoughts about it, I thought about, what about the social protocols? How does that have an effect on it? In the sense that when you go to an art gallery, you know you're not window shopping. you know you're going to look at a piece of art, and you know that art is not coming home with you. When you go and watch a ballet, I already know that I'm not gonna, you know, I love the piece, and I won't be able to hire the dancers to come and dance for a birthday celebration that I might throw for myself. But I guess when we go through life, when people are on the road and let's say looking for a romantic partner, a sexual partner, etc., you know that you can take them home. You can't take the artwork home, but you can take the person home. But perhaps, for instance, let's say a billionaire might be different, because you might be able to take the artwork home. You might be able to hire the dancers to do something else. So I feel like what I'm saying is like two sides. There's just many different perspectives as to the differences, perhaps the similarities. And to look at the neural level as well, it's the same dopamine. It's the same. For example, if I am online and I see, for example, on Twitter, and there's an exhibition about, say, Black ballet dancers, and there's artwork that's at the Tate, for instance, and that excites me. And that feeling I get between seeing it, maybe booking the tickets, and actually going to the gallery, that's dopamine right there. And I guess like seeing someone, find them attractive and being able to, I don't know, like see them and have a sexual experience with them, etc., etc. Seeing food and me going on, I don't know, Deliveroo and seeing a chicken burger, and the time between that when it comes to my door, it's all dopamine. As in the areas of the brain, there's no area of the brain that's specific to art. It's the same brain area. Maybe the level of dopamine might be different. I guess it's the prefrontal cortex and how you, as I said, the societal protocols that are around certain things. As in, you can take a person home, you can't take the artwork home. Perhaps that's affected by money. But I say like the fact that if you go into an art gallery, it's more likely that, as I said, you could find your soulmate than take the artwork home. do you know what I'm trying to say? So it's I mean, I don't know, that's just what I think. But it's just the whole thing where it's the same brain areas are working. There's no specific part of the brain that's this is art, or even in, say, like the visual cortex, okay, you've got like one side of the visual cortex for art, and no, it's not like that. It's all the same brain area. So it's just perhaps
it's all working in conjunction with each other. It seems like everything is firing at certain periods of time to kind of inform other sections, and it's this conversation that's happening from different segments. Right. Interesting. So, and you mentioned it, when it came to, dopamine responses and things like that. So it seems as though the brain does register pleasure from different modalities in the same way. And then, from the same modalities in different ways, I would say, is the pleasure I get from like viewing a beautiful picture, or in this scenario, seeing this piece of art, versus hearing the perfect verse, the same. So, is it purely perspective based on my historical experiences or my life experiences, based on the level at which I value certain things? For instance, if I value this pathway of art or this pathway of creativity versus this pathway of creativity, do things strike in a different way, or do you find that you can get the same pleasure from two completely different modalities?
In terms of research being done on that, I actually don't know. I don't know.
What do you think?
Yeah. So what I think, I have to put that disclaimer. What I think is the fact that I feel like, literally like what you said, I wanted to go on that whole thing about life experiences, memories, etc. I can listen to a song and it will have a certain effect on me, and look at a painting and it has a certain effect on me, pleasurable effect. But I can't say it's the same. And I feel like, this is just me thinking, I don't feel like research would say it's the same. It might say that certain, like the dopamine is fired. It might say that the certain area of the brain, is activated, but it's not the same, because even I feel like even if you find statistically that say hypothetically, there's a study that it could be the same, I feel like, but it's not. I feel like in a way how, when you look at something twice, it's never the same. And I say, when you go and look at the sky, like every picture I have of the sky, no two pictures are the same. Even on a day where it's just a blue sky, I have pictures of that. No two blue skies are the same. So I feel like the way that it affects you, yes, it's pleasure, but I feel like there's so many variables that can contribute to why you have that specific response to that stimulus. I hope that kind of answered something.
That's amazing. And I think that's one of the best ways to kind of, I guess, wade into really the conclusion of this talk, is that there are so many things that we can take, and I can just speak on behalf of just, music in general, definitely with a focal point within hip hop, is that we find that there's this absence of this more scientific, more neurological, more detail oriented, more cerebral, more poetic approach to something where folks are just doing it, people are just doing it. And we're doing it based off of, in a way, some levels of mimicry, right? And that's pretty much the basis of how we learn, in a way, even as children, right? We see someone do it, we hear somebody say that, and then in a way, we figure out a way in which it makes sense to our experience and our space and our capability as well. So it's refreshing to see and start drawing parallels as to, when I'm listening to a record, perhaps I should think about the context of how, if we're looking at the same picture, am I looking at this picture from the perspective of the person whom laid down the swaths of paint, or in this context, wrote this verse, or performing this dance? How does it feel to be them performing the dance, timing the breaths, timing when they should, again, be a little bit more expressive in their emotions, and when should they pull back? Is the person whom is creating the piece thinking about the intention or the thought process of the receiver of that dance? So if I'm writing a verse, or I'm writing a record, or someone, or I'm listening to a record, am I thinking to myself as I'm creating this process, how is it going to be received, and to what depth am I creating that process? And so I can't thank you enough for the innumerable amount of gems that people are going to pull from this conversation, and just getting the gears turning, my gears are turning, as to how we can get a little bit deeper when it comes to, if I speak in a certain tone, or if my facial structure looks different, or if my emotions are different, is that firing in one section of the brain more so, or another section? And in that way,
I just wanted to add on, no, because I love what you're saying, and it really reminded me of, okay, so say when I write a poem, I'm inspired and I just write it. I don't think about how people read it, etc., etc. I just write it. And I remember, I think a couple of years ago, I actually used to read it to my siblings, and it was quite fun to sort of see, can you guess what this is about, or what do you think this is about? But then at the same time, I was able to say, read my poem again, and it might sound really weird, but I can read it from a perspective of an audience, which is just really strange, but I can disassociate myself from it, read it, and actually get something else out of it, even if I was the one that wrote it and I know why I wrote it. And literally, that's what you're saying. You can come another day, because say, for instance, poems that I've written, I mean, I've got so many poems, and when I go back and read something I wrote perhaps in 2018, I'm not reading that as me who wrote, I'm just reading it, and then I'm like, why, like, what was that, like, where did that come from? And I'm now, with the experiences I've had, say, a couple years later, that also, it's weird, you can be an audience to your own work, and not just in a critical way, because I know a lot of times, you know, we are quite critical of our own work, but just looking at your work, or listening to a song you've made, or just looking at a picture you've taken, and how do you perceive that now, and maybe a couple of years later again, it might be different, and how people perceive it as well. Nothing's wrong. Like, even if I know why I wrote a poem, I mean, I'd love to know what people think, because to me, art is open to interpretation, even if there is context. That's just what I think.
Art is open to interpretation, even if there's that is just, I don't think I can outdo that. I think that's just where we might have to, you know, that's an amazing, you know, that's an amazing quote. And again, I can't thank you enough for your time. I can't thank you enough for, you know, your patience throughout this process. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on, and I'm definitely excited to see what's to come from, you know, all of your endeavors and all of your creative and scientific related pursuits. And yeah, if anybody's watching this and is interested in this conversation, if you got to this point, I commend you, because we went deep in these topics. And, encourage you to follow Dwaynica and put yourself in a position where you're thinking a little bit deeper about, you know, how can you inform your approach when it comes to freestyle, when it comes to interpolation and perspective. So either way, hopefully you have an amazing day, and yeah, keep going. You're doing great.